The morning did not know what it had just done. That is the thing about mornings, about the indifferent brightness of a city already in motion. It does not register the weight of what moves through it. The taxis and the coffee vendors and the people with their shoulders bent against the wind had no idea that a young woman was standing on the pavement outside a luxury building, holding a photograph that had just rearranged her entire understanding of the life she had walked into. The world kept going. It always keeps going. And Zara Mensah stood in the middle of it with Jian Han's words still in the air between them. "The person who killed my sister has been inside your home." And she breathed, slowly, deliberately, one breath at a time, the way her father had taught her when she was 9 years old, and a bigger girl at school had told her she didn't belong there, that her accent was wrong, and her hair was wrong, and her face was the wrong kind of beautiful. Her father had knelt in front of her that afternoon and pressed 2 fingers gently to her sternum and said, "When the world gets loud, Zara, come back here. One breath, then another. The ground is always still underneath the noise. Find it." She found it now. She let the breath out. She looked at Jian, and Jian looked back at her with the eyes of a woman who had been carrying the ending of this story alone for 5 years and had finally found someone she was prepared to share it with. "How long?" Zara said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Have you known about the figure in the photograph?" Jian glanced down at the image still held between her gloved fingers. "4 days," she said. "I have been watching this building for 3 weeks. The photograph of you in the kitchen was taken from across the street with a long lens." She paused. "Not by me. It was sent to me by the same person who sent you the photograph of my sister." Zara went very still. The same anonymous number. Jian's chin dipped once. "Whoever they are feeding information to both of us, separately, deliberately." Her dark eyes lifted to Zara's. "Which means they want us to find each other." Zara looked at her. "Or they want us to find something together that neither of us can find alone." Something moved in Jian's expression, not quite surprise, but the recalibration of someone adjusting to a person who is sharper than expected. She was quiet for a moment. A bus moved past them on the street, loud and oblivious. A man in a long coat spoke rapidly into his phone 3 feet away. The city breathed. Neither woman moved. "There is a cafe," Jian finally said. 2 streets north. Will you come?" Zara thought about Se-jin at his desk. She thought about the hour he had given her. She looked at her watch. 22 minutes had passed. She had 38 remaining, and she knew, with the particular knowledge of a woman who had spent 4 months learning to read a man who specialized in not being read, that he was already watching the clock. "Yes," she said. "But I need to be back in 30 minutes." Jian turned without further ceremony and walked. Zara followed. Welcome back to Neon and Gold Stories. If you are joining us for the first time today, please, for the love of everything that is good in this world, go back and watch Part 1 and Part 2 before you continue. What is happening in this episode will not merely confuse you without them, it will deprive you of the full weight of what you are about to feel, and this story deserves to be felt in full. If you have been here from the beginning, you already know that we are past the part where things are complicated in comfortable ways. We are in the territory now where the truth has teeth. Find somewhere to sit, get something warm to drink, drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from, because I have been reading every single one, and this story has now reached people in cities I have never visited, in languages I do not speak, and that means everything to me. Subscribe. Like this video, share it with everyone you love who understands that the most dangerous love stories are the ones where the danger is real. Part 3 is here, and the figure in that window reflection has a name, and when you hear it, I need you to remember that I warned you. The cafe was small and warm, and the kind of place that had survived gentrification by being too committed to being unremarkable. Formica tables, a radio playing something softly in the background that nobody was listening to, a woman behind the counter who did not look up when they came in. Jian chose a table in the back corner, the table of someone who had spent years choosing seats that faced the door. Zara noticed this. She sat across from her and put her bag on the chair beside her and tried to find in the architecture of Jian's features some map of what she was carrying. Up close, the resemblance to the photograph was even more acute. The same high, angular cheekbones, the same deep-set, dark eyes, but where So-yeon's expression in the photograph was open and laughing and entirely at ease, Jian wore her face like armor, precise and beautiful and calibrated to give nothing away that she had decided to give away.
She had the posture of a woman who had been running for a long time and had recently deliberately decided to stop and turn around and face whatever was behind her. "You look like her," Zara said quietly. Jian received this without flinching. "I know." A pause. People who knew her used to stop in the street, for the first year. It happened less as time passed. People's memories get blurry. Something moved in her jaw. I was grateful for it, and I hated being grateful for it. Zara said nothing. She let the silence sit. She had learned from her father that some things need room to breathe before they'll come out. Jian folded her hands on the table. She looked at them for a moment. Then she looked up. "I am going to tell you something that I have told no one else," she said. "Not because I trust you fully yet, because I am out of time and you are the only one in a position to do anything with it." "What happened to the time?" Zara asked. Jian's eyes were level. 3 days ago, I received a message, not from the anonymous number, from a man I recognize, a man who works for the governance structure above Quan Group." She paused. "He told me that they know I am in the city. He told me that my presence here is being interpreted as a destabilizing action. He told me that I had 72 hours to leave before they moved to contain the situation." Zara's blood went cold. Contain? That is the word he used. Jian's expression did not change. It is the same word that was used in the internal correspondence about my sister. I know because I spent 2 years finding and reading every piece of it that had not yet been destroyed. She held Zara's gaze. "I have 41 hours left." The room around them continued its ordinary morning. 2 men laughed at a table near the window. The radio played on. Zara looked at Jian and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that this woman had walked to the front of that building this morning, knowing she might not have many mornings left, and she had come anyway, for her sister, for the truth, for whatever chance remained. "Tell me everything," Zara said, "from the beginning." Jian looked at her for one more measured moment. Then she began. She had been 21 when So-yeon died, a university student in Busan, 200 miles from Seoul, studying economics and sending her sister voice messages every other day, because So-yeon was the person she called when the world felt too large, and Jian was the person So-yeon called when the world felt too lonely. They were not just sisters, they were each other's primary witness, the person who made the other's life feel real and seen and worth living fully. The call came on a Tuesday morning. An official from the Seoul Metropolitan Police, speaking in the careful, clipped language of a man delivering information he has delivered before and does not intend to deliver more of than is strictly necessary. "Your sister. An apparent suicide. A note was found. Arrangements can be made through the following channels." Jian remembered standing in the corridor of her university dormitory in the wrong shoes. She had grabbed one boot and one trainer in the dark and hadn't noticed, holding her phone against her ear after the call ended and listening to the silence where her sister's voice used to live. She stood there for a very long time. She did not cry immediately. The grief, she would later understand, was too large for tears in the first moments. It needed to find the body's exit slowly, over days, over weeks, in the particular way of something that has no intention of leaving quickly. She had gone to Seoul. She had gone to the apartment, and the first thing she had seen sitting in the kitchen of So-yeon's apartment on the table next to a cold cup of tea was a note, 3 paragraphs in her sister's handwriting, and Jian had read it, and she had read it again, and then she had done what any person who knew their sister completely and irreversibly would do when presented with 3 paragraphs that did not sound like her. She had read it a 3rd time and understood that it was a performance, that every word was precisely correct and entirely false, the way a very good forgery is technically accurate and fundamentally false. "I know my sister's voice," Jian told Zara, and the words came out with a quietness that was more devastating than volume would have been. I have 10,000 voice messages from her on a hard drive that I carry everywhere I go. I know how she wrote. I know what she said when she was sad. She did not say the things in that note. She was not a person who made peace with circumstances that had been unfair to her. She was a fighter. She was angry. She would have left a note full of anger if she had written one at all. Her jaw tightened. That note was full of acceptance, of resignation, of a woman making a graceful exit from a room she felt wronged in. That was not who she was. Zara said quietly, "You knew immediately." "Immediately," Gian said. But knowing and proving are two different countries. She had spent the first 6 months trying to access official channels. The police investigation had been closed rapidly, far more rapidly than standard procedure permitted for a case involving a woman under 30 with no prior history of mental health crises. The coroner's report contained 3 factual errors that Gian identified through basic research and that were never corrected in the official record. The Business Weekly article went up and came down within 18 hours, pulled so completely that even search engine caches of it vanished within 48 hours. Someone with significant digital reach had cleaned it up. I tried to go to a journalist, 3 different journalists. The first one told me he was interested and then went silent. The second one told me she was sorry but she had a family to consider. The third one... She stopped. A brief pause. He published a small piece on a smaller platform. Nothing that named names, just questions about the speed of the official closure. She looked at her hands. 2 days later, his apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken, just the files related to the story, and a photograph of his children on his desk was moved to the floor. She let that sit. He called me that night. He said he was sorry. I told him I understood. Zara had been still throughout all of this, with the practiced stillness she had learned in the months since her father's death. The stillness of someone who has had to receive large and terrible things without the luxury of falling apart in the middle of them. But she felt something moving through her chest now that was not calm. It was the slow building heat of a particular kind of anger, the kind that doesn't make noise, the kind that makes decisions. "Who did it?" Zara said. "Do you know?" Gian met her eyes. "I know the architecture," she said carefully. "The family governance structure above Quan Group has a man at its center. Not the oldest member, the second. A man called Quan Dejang." She watched Zara's face. "He is Sojin's uncle."
The cafe continued its mourning around them. Zara held Jian's gaze and kept her breathing even, and thought about the conversation she had had with Sojin that morning, about the family structure, about the people who sat above him in layers that predated him by 3 generations, about the way he had said the people who arranged it were protected by the same structures that protected me. She thought about how he had said it as though the protection was the cage and not the shelter. She thought about a man who had landed in Tokyo to a closed investigation and a sealed verdict and had to absorb it and continue living inside a structure built by the same hands that had taken the person he loved. "Does Sojin know?" she said. "About his uncle specifically." Gian was quiet for a moment. Then, "I believe he suspects. I do not believe he has ever allowed himself to confirm it." She paused. "Because confirming it would require him to do something about it, and doing something about it would require him to move against the architecture that built him." She looked at Zara steadily. "He is not a weak man, but there is a difference between courage and dismantling the entire structure of your own existence." Zara absorbed this. Then she said, "The figure in the photograph, in the kitchen reflection," she kept her voice even. "Who is it?" Gian reached into the inside pocket of her coat. She withdrew a second photograph, smaller than the first, printed on ordinary paper, cropped and enlarged from the original, so that the figure in the reflection was less shadowy, more defined. She placed it on the table between them and turned it to face Zara. Zara looked at it. The figure was a man, older, broad through the shoulders, standing in the background of the kitchen with the absolute stillness of someone who had been there many times before and had no reason to hide. His face was turned slightly away from the window's reflection, which is why it had been so indistinct in the original photograph. but the crop and enhancement made something visible that had not been visible before: the line of a jaw, the angle of a collar, and on the wrist of the hand, just visible at the edge of the frame, a watch, a specific watch, the kind of men who understand the language of expensive things wear to communicate a particular kind of power to other men who also understand that language. She studied it. She looked up at Jian. How did he get into the penthouse? Jian's expression was steady. That is the question, she said. There are two possible answers. Someone on Sojin's security team let him in. Or, she stopped. Then, he has a key. The silence that followed was the one that follows something when the room understands what it means before the mind has finished processing it. A key, Zara said, carefully. He owned the penthouse before Sojin. It was part of the inheritance settlement after the grandmother's death, but the documentation of the transfer is, she paused, incomplete, which may be accidental, or it may mean that Daejong has never fully relinquished access. Zara looked at the photograph. She looked at the figure. She thought about the mornings she had moved through that penthouse in Sojin's gray shirt with her hair loose and her guard entirely down, existing in the uncomplicated warmth of a space she had started to believe was safe. She thought about the sensation on 2 separate mornings of feeling slightly watched, which she had attributed to the floor-to-ceiling windows and the transparency of that high-altitude, exposed life. She thought about how she had dismissed it each time because there had seemed to be no rational explanation for it. She picked up the photograph. She pressed it flat on the table. She looked at Jian and said, "What do you need from me?" Jian studied her for a long moment with the evaluating eyes of someone who has learned to be careful about what they believe in. Then she said, "There is evidence, documents that I have gathered over 5 years, financial records, internal correspondence, a set of recordings." She stopped. So-yeon was careful. She understood toward the end that something was wrong. She started keeping records, an audio diary. She hid a copy with a person she trusted. That person found me 8 months after she died. The recordings are... She stopped again, and this was the first time in the whole conversation that Jian's composure showed a fracture. Small, almost nothing, the slight bright-eyed quality of a person keeping tears somewhere they cannot get out. She said, "They are her voice," quietly, talking about what was happening to her, what she was afraid of, what she suspected. She steadied. And in the last recording, made 3 days before she died, she says a name. Zara's chest was tight. Daejong? Jian shook her head. She says 2 names. She held Zara's gaze. Daejong is one of them. And the second?
Ji-yun looked at her. She looked at her for one long, careful, waited moment, and then she said something that Zara felt in the base of her spine before she fully heard it with her ears. The second name is someone I have not been able to place, a name I do not recognize, someone So-yeon refers to only once, at the very end of the recording, with something that sounds less like accusation and more like... Ji-yun paused. Her eyes were very steady and very serious, like she is surprised, like it is someone she did not expect, someone she thought was safe. Ji-yun looked at Zara directly. Someone she describes as being very close to Se-jin, closer than family, closer than an employee. She paused. Someone she describes as being the person Se-jin trusts most in the world. The radio in the cafe played on. The men at the window laughed at something on one of their phones. The woman behind the counter restacked cups. The world held its ordinary shape, and Zara sat in the back corner of a formica-tabled cafe 2 streets from the building she lived in and felt the ground shift underneath the ground. "Who?" she said. "I don't know," Ji-yun said. "She uses a nickname, a private name between them, something So-yeon called him." She paused. "I have never been able to match it to a real person, but if I could get access to Se-jin, if I could ask him directly..." Zara looked at her. "I can get you access." Ji-yun shook her head immediately. "No, not yet. Not until I know it is safe." A pause.
Because if the person So-Yun named is still close to him, then bringing me to Se-Jin alerts that person, and alerting that person with 41 hours left before the governance structure moves to contain me. She let the sentence finish itself. Zara looked at the photographs on the table. She looked at the woman across from her. She thought about Se-Jin and his absolute certainty that he could read the rooms around him, that his instincts were sound, and that the walls he had built were sufficient. She thought about how much it would cost him to discover that the person he trusted most in the world might be the second name on a dead woman's recording. She thought about what it meant to love someone and also to be the person who had to put that in front of them. She looked at her watch. She had 11 minutes. "I'm going to tell him about this meeting," she said. Ji-Yun's eyes sharpened. "I just told you, I'm going to tell him about this meeting," Zara repeated, steady and clear, "but not about the second name, not yet. I need to watch his face when he finds out you're in the city and that you met me. I need to see who he calls first, who he tells, what his instinct is." She met Ji-Yun's gaze. If the person So-Yun named is that close to him, his first reaction to this news will tell me something. Maybe not the name, but something. Ji-Yun looked at her for a very long moment. Something moved through her expression that was harder to name than anything she'd shown before. Not quite trust, not quite relief, something in between, the precursor to both. "You are good at this," she said quietly. "I learned it from grief," Zara said simply. "Grief teaches you to pay very close attention." She picked up the photographs and held them out. Ji-Yun shook her head. "Keep them," she said. "I have copies." She reached into her coat one more time and placed a small card on the table. No name on it, just a number. "This is a clean number, not the anonymous one. Mine. You have 41 hours. A pause. After that, regardless of what has or hasn't happened, I disappear again. For good this time, probably." Zara looked at the card. She picked it up. She put it in the inside pocket of her coat, next to where the original note had been. She stood. She looked down at Ji-Yun, who remained seated, who sat in the back corner of a cafe on a Tuesday morning like a woman who had made a certain kind of peace with uncertainty and was simply waiting now to see which version of the future arrived. "I'm going to call you tonight," Zara said, "one way or another." She walked out. The door swung shut behind her. The morning took her back. She walked fast, not running. Zara Mensah did not run from things she had decided about herself a long time ago, but with the ground-covering purpose of someone whose mind is already 3 steps ahead of her body. She replayed the conversation as she walked. She organized it, piece by piece, the way her father had taught her. The architecture above Kwon Group, Kwon Dae-jung, the penthouse key, the recordings, 2 names on So-Yun's final audio diary. The second name, someone close, someone trusted, someone who had been allowed near enough to be given a private name by the woman Se-Jin loved. She went through the lobby. The morning concierge nodded. She pressed the elevator button and stood with her reflection in the polished doors and looked at herself and thought, "You are about to walk back into the room where the man you love is sitting, and you are going to have to decide in the moment you arrive how much of the truth to give him, and in what order, and whether the order matters, and whether protecting him from the second name right now is kindness or its own kind of complicity." The elevator moved upward. She held the photographs against her side. She thought about So-Yun's voice on a recording 3 days before she died, saying a name she hadn't expected to say, surprised by it. She thought about what it feels like to be surprised by the source of the danger, about that particular surprise is the worst kind, because it means the walls you put up were facing the wrong direction the whole time. The elevator opened. Se-Jin was standing in the hallway. Not at his desk. Not in the living room, in the hallway, 10 feet from the elevator doors, with his phone in his hand and his jacket on, which meant he had been 30 seconds from coming down himself. His platinum silver hair was perfectly in order, and his expression was organized into something that was trying to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. His dark eyes moved from her face to the photographs pressed against her side and back to her face. One pass, complete and rapid and missing nothing. "You went to the florist," he said. It was not a statement. It was the careful, precise deployment of what he already knew was not true, offered as an opening so she could decide how she wanted to enter this. Zara stepped out of the elevator. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about everything Ji-Yan had said. She thought about the second name. She thought about the recording. She thought about 41 hours. She thought about her father, who had always said that the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to trust them with the real thing. "No," she said. "I went to meet Ji-Yan." The hallway held the quiet of high altitude and expensive insulation. Seo-jin looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes with a velocity that he contained entirely before it reached his face. His jaw was still. His hands were still. He was very, very controlled in the way that things are controlled when the alternative is the opposite of controlled. "Come inside," he said, quietly. She gave him the version of it that she had decided on in the elevator, not a lying version, an ordered version. The cafe, Ji-Yan's account of So-Yan's death, the note that wasn't right, the years of evidence gathering, the journalist, the photographs, Dae-jung's name, the penthouse key. She watched his face through all of it the way she had told Ji-Yan she would, and what she saw there was not what she had braced herself to see. She had prepared herself for suppression, for the face of a man carefully concealing something. What she saw instead was the face of a man receiving confirmation of something he had already suspected and had been living beside the suspicion of for years. Not surprise, recognition. The terrible, hollow recognition of a person who had been telling themselves a version of a story they already knew wasn't fully true. His uncle. That landed with the most weight. She watched it land, the slight drop in the muscles around his eyes, the way his hands, clasped in his lap, pressed together slightly tighter. He said nothing for a long time when she reached that part. He just received it and let it sit between them and looked at the table. "The key to the penthouse," he said, finally, his voice very controlled. "I had the locks changed when I moved in, standard protocol." A pause. "I assumed." Ji-Yan thinks the documentation of the transfer may have been deliberately left incomplete, that there may be a second key that was never surrendered. Seo-jin looked at her. His eyes were doing the thing they did when he was processing at a speed the room couldn't follow. Then he said, "The recordings. So-Yan's voice recordings, Ji-Yan has them." "Yes, secured. She's been protecting them for years." She paused. "She says on the last one So-Yan names names. She watched him. She names your uncle." A beat. "And?" Zara met his gaze. "And one other name that Ji-Yan hasn't been able to identify, someone So-Yan called by a private nickname." She kept her voice even and her eyes on his. She described this person as being very close to you, the person you trust most. The silence that came after this was different from the previous silences. It had a different texture, heavier and more specific. Seo-jin looked at her, and she looked back at him, and she watched something move through him that was not performance, and not management, and not the controlled neutrality he wore like a second skin. Something real. Something that looked for one exposed and unguarded second like fear. Not the fear of a man afraid for himself, the fear of a man who has just been handed a piece of information that requires him to start questioning something he has never questioned before. She noticed, with the quiet precision of a woman paying very close attention, that he did not immediately say, "I can't imagine who that could be." He didn't say that. He was quiet, for a long time, quiet in a specific way. The quiet of a man running names through his mind and landing on one that he immediately does not want to say out loud. "Seo-jin," she said softly. He looked at her. "Is there something you need to tell me?" His jaw tightened. Released, he stood up and moved to the window, and she watched the city take his reflection and double him in the glass, and she thought about the figure in the other photograph, the one that shouldn't have been there, and she felt the chill of it even now in the warmth of the penthouse living room. "There is a man," he said to the window. His voice was low and flat and choosing every word, "who has been with me since I was 24 years old. He came to Quan Group from a lateral position in a competitor firm. He is the most competent person I have ever employed. He handles the things that are not handled by ordinary channels." He paused. "I have trusted him in ways I have not trusted anyone else. Business matters, personal matters." A pause. "He was in Tokyo with me when Soyeon died." He stopped. "He was the one who told me my phone was unreachable, that there had been a network issue, that Soyeon had tried to call and couldn't get through." Zara's chest was very tight. "What is his name?" Seojin turned from the window. His face was the face of a man at the edge of an enormous and irreversible thing. "Park Jin-ho," he said. Zara said quietly, "And what did Soyeon call him? Between them, a private name." Seojin looked at her for a long moment with eyes that had gone somewhere very still. "He called him the Shadow," he said, "because she said he moved like he was always standing just behind the light." He stopped. "She never liked him. I told her she was being—" He stopped again. His jaw worked. He looked at Zara with the expression of a man on the far side of a door he has just realized he should have opened years ago. "I told her she was being unfair." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. The next several hours moved with a controlled urgency that was different from the mornings. Seojin made calls that Zara was present for this time. He did not ask her to leave the room. He spoke in Korean and English in turns, rapid and precise, and carrying the authority she had heard once before when she had asked him who he really was. He contacted the building's security system administrator, not through normal channels, but through a direct line that bypassed the standard service structure. He asked for a complete access log, every entry and exit, every override, every instance of keycard use and biometric clearance for the past 8 months. He asked for it immediately, and he asked for it to be sent to a secure device that Park Jin-ho did not know existed. Zara watched him do this and thought about the man he had described, the most competent person he had ever employed, the man who handled things that didn't go through ordinary channels, the man who had been in Tokyo, who had told him the phone network was down, who had delivered the news that by the time it was delivered was already too clean and too concluded to fight. She thought about what it means to be betrayed by the version of trust that you were most certain of, not the new love, always suspect in its novelty, not the family, complicated from birth, the chosen loyalty, the person you selected deliberately from a position of judgment and experience, and decided, this one I trust with the things that matter. She thought about her father, who had been betrayed that way once by a business partner of 15 years, and who had sat at their kitchen table the night he found out and been very quiet for a very long time before he said, "The worst betrayals are always the ones that required you to be your best self first, the ones that couldn't have happened if you hadn't been trusting fully, which means they are, in a way, the price of having trusted fully, and I would rather pay that price than never have trusted at all." She crossed to the kitchen and made tea, not because she wanted tea, because her hands needed something to do, and the ritual of it, kettle, water, the solid ceramic weight of cups, was grounding, in the way physical things are grounding when the mind is moving too fast. Seojin came to the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. He looked at the 2 cups on the counter. He looked at her. She slid one toward him without comment. He picked it up. They stood in the kitchen where an unknown man had stood in the reflection of the glass and watched a woman laugh and be happy and not know she was being observed. They drank their tea. Outside, the city was moving toward afternoon.
"I need to find Jian," Sejon said. Zara looked at him. "She has the recordings, she has the evidence she's gathered, and she has 40—" he checked his watch, 38 hours before they move to silence her again. His jaw was set in the expression she had learned meant he had stopped being hurt and started being operational. "I am not going to let that happen." Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her inner coat pocket and placed Jian's card on the counter between them. He looked at it. He looked at her.
Something moved in his expression that she recognized now as the particular quality of a man who is still not fully accustomed to being surprised by the ways in which the person beside him is already ahead of him. "You got her number," he said. "I told you I was going to handle it," Zara said. He picked up the card. He held it carefully, the way you hold something that represents a debt you didn't know you were carrying. Then he said, quietly and without architecture around it, "She came all this way, for Soyeon. 5 years." He stopped. His throat moved. "Alone." Zara didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "I should have found her," he said. "I tried, but I should have tried harder. I should have—" He stopped himself, put the sentence down. He was learning, she thought, watching him, learning the difficult lesson that the past's should-haves are a room you can visit but not live in, that the only useful direction is forward, and that forward requires both hands free. "She's here now," Zara said, "and we have 38 hours. He looked at her. "We," he said. "We," she said, plainly. He held her gaze and she held his, and something settled between them that was different from everything that had settled between them before, quieter than their first argument, deeper than the morning they had admitted they were falling. This was the settling of two people who have looked at the full complexity of what they are standing inside together and have chosen, with complete awareness, not to step back from it. He put the card in his jacket pocket. He straightened. He was already somewhere else in his mind, she could see it, already moving through the operational geometry of what the next 38 hours required. But he paused before he left the kitchen. He turned back. He looked at her with the full weight of it. "The person in Soyeon's recording," he said. "If it's Jinho—" He stopped. "If it is, then everything I built in the last 5 years, I built with his hands inside it. Every decision, every structure, every—" He stopped, looked at the window, looked back. "It would mean that I have been—" "It would mean," Zara said carefully, "that you were deceived by someone very skilled at deceiving people. That is not the same as being complicit." She held his gaze. "I told you that before, about a different version of this. I'll tell you again as many times as it takes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "What did I do to deserve you?" She almost smiled. "You were honest when it would have been much easier not to be," she said. "That's usually enough." He left the kitchen. She turned back to the window and looked at the city, and pressed her hand flat against the glass and felt its cold through her palm, and thought about Jian sitting in that cafe with 38 hours on the clock. She thought about the recording, about Soyeon's voice still alive on a hard drive somewhere, saying a name she hadn't expected to say. She thought about Park Jin-ho, about a man who moved like he was always standing just behind the light. She thought about the fact that Sejeon was about to call him. She had not told Sejeon the thing she had noticed in the kitchen. She held on to it the way you hold something sharp, carefully, with full awareness of what it is. She had not told him that when she placed Jian's card on the counter, she had watched his face for the second name. She had watched him receive the information about someone trusted, someone close, and she had seen him go quiet in the specific way of a man landing on a name he wasn't ready to say. Park Jin-ho, the shadow, the most trusted person. But that was not the thing she was holding. The thing she was holding was this. When she had said someone Soyeon called by a private nickname, and she had watched him land on the name, and she had seen the fear in his face, the real, unguarded fear that lasted 1 second before the composure returned, she had noticed something. He looked at his phone, not at her, not at the window, not into the middle distance the way people look when they're remembering. He looked at his phone, a small, involuntary glance, the way people look at the thing they are about to do before they've consciously decided to do it. And then he recovered and turned to the window and said Park Jin-ho's name, and 10 minutes later, in the other room, she had heard him making calls, and she had not heard Park Jin-ho's name among them. She stood at the kitchen window and held this and turned it over carefully, and thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean, and how to know the difference. She thought about her father, who had said, When something small and quiet tells you something large and loud, don't dismiss the small, quiet thing. It always knows first. She pressed her hand harder against the cold glass. She looked at the city. She looked at the reflection of the kitchen behind her, ordinary and warm and bright. Empty.
Just her, just the kitchen, just the afternoon light and the clean counter and the 2 cups of tea. She exhaled. Then her phone buzzed. Not a call, a message, from Jian's new number, the clean one. He's been following you since you left the cafe. Dark coat, tall. He stopped when you went into the building. He's still outside. Zara looked at the message. Her heart was entirely steady, which was the thing about her that even she sometimes found surprising, that in the moments of genuine danger, her body went calm and cold and absolutely clear. Her father's daughter, all the way down. She typed back, "What does he look like?" The reply came in under 10 seconds. "Older, broad. He's wearing a watch I've seen before. I know whose it is." Zara looked at the message for a long moment. Then she typed, "So do I." She put her phone in her pocket. She picked up her tea. She walked to the kitchen doorway and looked down the hall toward the study where Se-Jin sat at his desk, talking in a low voice on his phone. She watched him for a moment. The silver hair, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of his stillness that she now knew was not coldness, but containment. A man holding something enormous in a frame that had been built strong enough to hold it. She thought about Jian and the clock. She thought about the recordings. She thought about the second name on the recording, surprised and frightened, and 3 days from the end. She thought about Park Jin-ho, the shadow, the man who moved behind the light. She thought about the involuntary glance at the phone. She thought about the man in the dark coat outside the building with the watch she recognized from the photograph. She thought about all of it, and she organized it, and she understood with the cold, clean clarity of a woman who has learned to trust the small, quiet things, that something in the shape of what she was looking at was not entirely right, that there was a piece still turned face down, that the picture on this table was not yet the picture. She walked down the hall. She stood in the doorway. Se-Jin looked up from his call. She held up one hand, not to interrupt, but to say, "When you're done." He ended the call. He looked at her with alert, searching eyes. "Jian just messaged me," she said. "There is a man outside the building, dark coat." She recognized him. She held Se-Jin's gaze. "He works for your uncle." She paused. "Which means they know I met Jian this morning, which means the plan to go public that we discussed yesterday." She stopped. "We don't have the time we thought we had." Se-Jin was already on his feet. "How long has he been there?" "Since I left the cafe." She paused. "Se-Jin." She held his gaze when it came to her. "The access log you requested from the security system. When will it come through?" "Within the hour." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to look at it yourself," she said, "alone, before you show it to anyone else." Something shifted in his eyes, the beginning of a question. She watched him choose not to ask it yet, watched the intelligence of the man she had married process the fact that she was asking for something specific, in a specific way, and that the specificity had a reason she hadn't fully named. "All right," he said quietly. She nodded. She turned to go, then stopped, turned back because there were things you said in case you didn't get another moment to say them, and she had learned this, painfully and permanently, at her father's bedside. She looked at him steadily. "Whatever is in that log, whatever it tells you, I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her with a face that had nothing left on it except what was true. He said, "I know." She almost said more. She didn't. She went back to the kitchen and stood by the window and looked at the street below until she found the dark coat, broad shoulders, older man, absolutely still on the pavement across the street, looking up at a building he had, at some point in its history, owned. She looked at his wrist. Even from this height, even through the glass, the watch caught the light. Her phone buzzed again. Jian. "There's something I didn't tell you in the cafe, about the second name on the recording. I said I couldn't identify it. That's not entirely true. I said I couldn't place it, but I've placed it now. I placed it when I saw Se-Jin's name on the building register. This morning." A pause. The 3 dots of a message still being composed.
Zara stood at the window with her phone and her cold, clean heart and watched the dots. The private name Sayan used. In the recording, she calls him the one who came before Sayan. She says, "I should have listened to what my gut said when I met the one who came before Sayan. I thought he was an ally. I thought he was different from the family. I thought he was trying to protect us both." Another pause. Zara, the one who came before Sayan. In Kwan Group succession terms, that is the title given to the person who was originally designated heir before Sayan's grandmother changed the succession in his favor. The person who lost his position to a 26-year-old who came in and performed better than anyone expected and displaced him from a line he had been promised since birth. The dots again. Zara held her breath. That person never worked openly against Sayan. He swallowed his displacement and became, according to every internal record I have accessed, his most loyal colleague, his closest confidant, the most trusted person in his world. The final message came through and Zara read it, and the city outside the window and the man in the dark coat below and the penthouse around her and the 37 hours and Jiyan and the recordings and Sayan's voice and all of it shrank to a single point of cold white clarity. It's not Jinho, Zara. Jinho is just the instrument. The second name on the recording is the man who handed Jinho the instructions. It's the man who was here first, the man who was supposed to be Kwan Group, the man who smiled and stepped back and spent 5 years building himself into the architecture of Sayan's life, so completely that Sayan has never once considered looking at him as anything other than safe. I think you need to look up who held the succession before Sayan, and I think when you do, you're going to recognize the name, because I think you've already met him. And that is where we have to stop tonight. She's already met him. That sentence just changed the entire shape of this story. Someone we have seen already. Someone in the penthouse world, the Kwan orbit, the close and trusted circle that Zara has been moving through since she arrived with her carry-on and her grief and her father's promise. The second name is not a stranger. The second name has a face she knows, and Park Jin-ho is only the instrument. Drop everything you are doing right now and leave a comment telling me what you think you know. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. Tell me who you think the second name is, because if you have been paying close attention from the very beginning, there is someone you may have already forgotten. A face mentioned once, an introduction made in passing, a name said in a room that you may not have thought to keep hold of. Think back, go back to part 1, because the answer was always there. It was always there. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, share part 3 with every person you know who deserves a story that treats them like they are intelligent enough to feel the full weight of something real. And get ready, because in part 4, Zara learns the name, Sayan opens the access log, and the person who has been standing just behind the light for 5 years is about to step into it. And I promise you, when the light hits them, nothing in this story will ever look the same again.